We can be in touch with you on email.
We are, yes, now you sign that. That's opposite your house, the shooting been going on.
Yeah.
Good. I think we have a responsibility not to serve just wine, but also to serve up such interesting and platform for creating such interesting ideas, exchanges, and showcasing the finer aspects of life, if I may say that, not just the food and beverage. Mr. Khanna and I have, if I may take the liberty of saying, developed a friendship over the last few years. I've been seeing him in the lobby and I've been meeting him as a guest of the hotel. And being a general manager for a hotel, you normally have an interaction which is about a very transactional interaction, and we talk about how the experience was of the guest, etc. And one day he mentioned that he's writing a book. Not too many of our corporate honchos do that. And suddenly he says, I'm writing a book, and I said, well, that's interesting. And when he told me the topic, I said, well, that sounds really exciting, and something which is very interesting. But he was very kind. He showed me he was one of the first few people to see the book in its final avatar. And I said, we must put together an evening to celebrate the book. So I think that's what we're doing today. I'm told the book has already become a success, and that's great to know. And I believe he's already spoken at the Literature Festival, the Times Lit Fest. So this is more not a launch, but this is a celebration of his book. And we wanted to thank you, Mr. Khanna, for partnering with us, giving us this opportunity, and of course for your patronage over the years, but giving us an opportunity to have an evening like this, so diverse from what we normally do in hotels. Thank you all for being here this evening, and look forward to the evening. Thank you. Sorry, may I invite Mr. Venkatraman on stage, please? President of the Forum.
Friends, before I say anything, I wish to invite Rahul Singh, who is going to be conducting the basic conversation with Atul Khanna. Yeah, yes. Please do come and take the stage, Rahul and Atul. I have known Rahul for many years, and I happened to meet Atul only 2 weeks ago. But a friend of mine, Francois Gauthier, sent a message to me saying that he knows Atul and he has just done a book, and would the FCC be interested in having him over. And so we got in touch with each other, and he sent me a copy of the book. I found it very interesting. I said, yeah, why not? So the option was between FCC auditorium or the Taj. So he suggested, let's do it at the Taj, because Satyajit has graciously invited us to have the event at the Taj. I said, fine. And that's how we are here. This is the first time that an FCC event is being conducted here in collaboration with the Taj Mahal Hotel, Bloomsbury. And this is the first book Atul Khanna has done. Atul is basically a risk-taking entrepreneur, makes most of his money abroad, but loves to live in Pune with his family. Rahul, as you know, is a veteran journalist, educated at Cambridge. He edited Reader's Digest and several other newspapers. He was with the Times of India and so on. So without wasting any more time, I want to invite Mr. Bedi, Managing Director of Bloomsbury, the publishers of the book, to come and say a few words.
We like to say that a book like this has never been published. We don't happen to say it too often, because that doesn't happen too often either. But I think with this book, I can safely say a book like this has never been published. Um, I think if you read the book, what strikes you is how can anyone think of writing such a book? Because the kind of canvas it covers, the ideas it comes up with, it talks about some issues and areas which are so close to India. And you know, if you listen to politicians and others, they talk about a new India. They talk about many things. They try to show that there are a lot of things that can happen. But if you read Atul's book, you really find what New India can be about. And as he passionately says, this is for the 600 million youngsters. You know, what we've been or been through, they shouldn't. They should look at a real New India. So he's got massive amount of ideas, some solutions which I think some people might call audacious, and definitely radical. So he talks about, let's say in the electrical system, he talks about single transferable vote. He says voting should not be linked to population power. He says, why do we need the Rajya Sabha? He says there should be a new constituent assembly. And he covers everything. He covers education, science, governance, administration, democracy, the whole gamut. And aptly, he ends with a chapter which suggests a new preamble to the Constitution. So you can imagine how radical this book is. So I would say the purpose of him writing the book and us publishing the book would really be met if two things happen. One is that youngsters read it, because to a great extent it's meant to just make them think of an India which could be totally different. And number two, I hope it comes to the attention of certain policymakers, bureaucrats and politicians, because there might be some things, there are a lot of radical things, I'm sure a lot of things they'll say, oh, this just can't happen. But if they have an open mind, there are chances that there could be some real good things that could happen. And then we could really have a true new India. So I thank Atul a lot for publishing with us. As I said, again I'll repeat, we really haven't published a book of this kind before. So I had to look at it very carefully to make sure that there weren't content in it which could really make some people upset. So thanks a lot for publishing with us. Thank you very much. I look forward to a great evening. Thank you.
Atul, you don't have to worry about the publisher for your next two books, okay? So for the sake of record, we need to have a picture with all the three of us standing and holding the book. Bear with me.
Sir, I request you to come. Please come. Sir, please come here. There, sir. One. Sir. Ready? Sir. Thank you.
Yeah? Thanks very much. So here we are, Rahul. It's your show now.
Okay.
Mike? Yes, that's you.
Is it on?
Yes, it is on.
Okay. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah?
Yes, we can, sir.
Yeah, okay, fine. I have met Atul only a short while ago. I think a couple of months ago, a mutual friend of ours told me about him, and I mentioned that we are having a literary festival in Kasauli. We have every year the Rahul Singh Literary Festival there. And I said, you're welcome to come there. And he turned up there. Atul, as I began to realize very quickly, is the kind of person who you take to immediately. And I took to him immediately because he's full of ideas and he's a very unusual personality. I dipped into his book, which he gave me then, and then again, in the last 3 days I've been reading it. I don't agree with some of but some of what he's written there. But I agree with a lot of what he says there. He covers a vast arena. So I can't go through all of it with you because we don't have enough time. But what I'm going to do is to ask him a few questions and a few points that I observed there, and he'll sort of take it from there. But I would just like to say that he's basically an entrepreneur. He built enterprises in manufacturing, engineering, and life sciences, and also built, this sounds to me very interesting, an Indo-European education corridor, and has also designed German cars. Very unusual mixture of things. About the Indo-European education corridor, I'll ask him later, because I think the two obsessions with him, one is of course changing the constitution, the other two is that we should spend and emphasize much more on health and education, the two areas which we have failed abysmally compared to a lot of other developing countries. So I'll start from asking him, well, the first part of the book is very critical of Nehru. Now I happen to be an admirer of Nehru. He ends off that bit on Nehru by saying, to me, Nehru doesn't add up. And he mentions about how Nehru's economic policies, were all wrong and all that. But I'd like to say to him that in hindsight, he might have been wrong. But at that time, all the countries, the major countries that I could think of, followed the same kind of policies of having a large public sector, not, and being very suspicious of the private sector. But Nehru sort of continued with that. Now, I'd like to ask Atul, why does he think that Nehru was a failure?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Big honor for my family and me, and honor also to be asked questions by two great opinion leaders of India. My book is not about Nehru. My book is about ideas of the 19th century were adopted in India by the same, which were developed in another continent, were developed in the 20th century for India by those influenced by that continent and are unfit for 21st century, where we have one of the greatest phenomena planet Earth has never seen, that is 600 million under 25 years. So this is a country that no longer needs precedents. This is a country that needs to evolve in innovation on its own. I have written one page about all the great leaders to make a simple point. And the simple point I'm making is that if your structure is of an ambassador car, it really doesn't matter who your driver is. Your journey will be between 19 bees. And I have not agreed, and I don't even dispute the greatness of all past leaders. I just said that, be that as it may, I use these leaders because we are so personality obsessed as a nation. Even today, if you see 99% of the media discourse is around leaders, that I just wanted to dive into structure. And you can't dive into changing the constitution without walking the reader through familiar gardens and softening those gardens. So I don't want to make this book about Pandit Nehru or about any great stalwart. I only want to say that if the structure was there is a reason why for 70 years so many great leaders have not taken India to its destiny. And the reason is structure. So I actually asked the country to lose or leave behind its obsession for leaders to solve problems and focus on structure. It's a very personal book. It's not a I in my personal life also don't hit on personalities, I hit on issues. So I don't want to make this book about Pandit Nehru, I want to make this book about structure, because even if you see the current elections going on, it's all about A versus B, and A and B are changing in every state. But the essential experience to the citizen is largely the same.
Yeah. Now, there's a very nice quote which I've got here from your book. We don't have a new car, but we have a new driver, which means Narendra Modi. And then you also talk about, I think you mentioned it over and over again, and I think you're absolutely right. You talk about the 600 million young people in this country. And then you're very harsh on what you call the unaccountable bureaucracy. Now, tell us something about the new driver that we've got now here, the 600 million people that you feel have to be addressed, and of course, on the unaccountable bureaucracy. These 3 points.
Let's start with the third. I have some very close friends in the bureaucracy, and almost all of them are brighter than me. But even the best of them will tell you, and as I've written in the book, that 50% of them are not quite there. Now, in today's factories, rejection rates are parts per million. Not 1%, 2%. So if you're at 50%, you know, this is the problem that you have. It goes back to the Constitution. There is a Section 311. I haven't even mentioned there is Section 311. I think in one lifetime, a man or a woman should serve on both sides of the table. It gives you a lot of perspective. If you are on one side of the table, based on an exam that you passed at a very young age, and on that basis go up 40 years, howsoever bright you may be, a competitive edge will be within you. Because today we are in a world where under 30s are creating billion-euro companies. So it is again not on the person. Those guys pass exams, then I can't pass the entrance also. My second problem with that structure is I am a late bloomer. The only promise my father asked me was, I won't pay your fees twice, and I obliged. But in a bureaucratic setup, it's how you rise academically at the age of 23. And lastly, it's a country that doesn't make products. You know, 1,000 years ago, 30% was our share of world trade. Today it is 0.3. So again, it's not personal. And all this is because you are creating universities, coaching classes for what? Not to create entrepreneurs, but to create permanent bureaucracies. So I think almost all people in India at some point in their life could come on this side of the table. And these people who came on this side of the table first, if they went to that side of the table, I think they will rock. I am actually being their friend by saying that come on both sides of the table. And in general, if 99% of the population of a country is on a contract employment, I think there should not be 1% who should not be on that contract employment. I prefer the German way, where there is one employment law. It's a certain fairness is needed. Because my dream is social equity with entrepreneurship. I think we are intrinsically a country of entrepreneurs. From the lady who sells fish to the lady who sells vegetables, and you can't make this a country of technicians.
Talking about the bureaucracy again, you advocate lateral entry into the bureaucracy. Is that one of the solutions to, because the bureaucracy there, whether you like it or not, how can we improve it? Can lateral entry help?
That's not my center point. There are so many experts who have analyzed bureaucracy. I am not one of those experts. I am making a simple point that if you have a 5% lateral entry and a 95% permanence, it's not going to make that much difference. It's just going to be tweaking. You know, in our times, there used to be ambassador. When I was in class 7, there was ambassador. When I was in class 9, it was ambassador Mark 2. When I went to college, there was ambassador Mark 3. And then when I passed out of college, there was ambassador Mark 4. Did it make a difference?
Even worse.
So, I am talking at another level. I am talking of a national employment where all citizens at all ages can come on either side. And I am saying these bright guys should come on both sides of the table. The country will rock because they are damn good. I am not a critic. I am not a personal critic. But I am a structural critic. I think once you are guaranteed sinecure for life, that fire is not there.
Now, you know, let's get to the heart of your book, which you say that we need a structural change in our constitution. I think that is the real basis of what you're saying. You need a new model. Tell me what have you got in mind?
My most original, foolish, radical, silly, stupid, brilliant, or ahead of its time solution. And we'll discuss one because cocktails are also nice and the evening is not the longest. Is the transferable vote. Read the paper today. So and so is a rebel candidate, so and so is a disgruntled candidate. It means first your entry into politics and your continuation in politics is dependent on a party boss. So how do you shift in a democracy should be about the people. So how do you begin the recalibration back to people? Second, it's based on negative voting, a wasted vote. You are likely to vote for Atul Khanna, you pitch Rahul Singh, you divide, you manipulate. You think so and so is winning, you waste their votes and then with arrogance say, don't waste your vote. Worry about the stability of the state or the nation. And all in all, the whole power goes away from the constitution to party bosses and you come into master-slave political parties. And I am saying that a politician is a damn nice guy. But his equation with the people is no longer direct. It's via the party boss who is not controlled by the constitution. And these master-slave parties are universal. Now imagine if you had transferable votes.
But when you say
You have a very great politician here, Mr. Anand Singh, you like him, you vote for him first. Then you like Atul Khanna, you vote for him second. My point is, it's a precondition that there are going to be very many wise guys. And whoever gets the aggregate is the guy who wins. So what happens is that the man begins to look to the people because the electorate is not threatened by a wasted vote. Why should I have a wasted vote 1 in 5 years at that?
No, but
I put 1, 2, 3, 4, preference 5, you put yours and then whoever wins.
Can I interject here? You say in your book that supposing parents have one child, they're entitled to one vote. If somebody has 5 children, they're also entitled to only one vote. So you're questioning the whole basis of adult franchise, aren't you?
I am questioning because I am worried. The computers, when they came, they used to occupy a building. And people used to say, yaar, Ganit Sikho, I can count on my fingers faster. I don't have perfect solutions. I am challenging difficult problems. In the way, all through my book I say, I invite you to come up with a better solution. I only want you to jump out of the 19th century box because you are in the 21st century. Don't bother whether Atul Khanna's solution is wise, but begin to see that don't accept these problems as a fact of life. Number one. So, my one worry is that 40 crores at 47 in an undivided India is today 160 crores. It is the greatest population increase in the history of mankind. And adult franchise was picked up from UK, where there are 1,000 other invisible forces which are towards sanity. And within those invisible forces in society, you pick up adult franchise and park it. Many people say, yaar, uneducated poor people, inke saath kya karna? According to me, that's not my game. According to me, man in Mercedes and man on the road in India thinks within 1 degree of each other. So I don't think India's problem is an uneducated vote or an educated vote. I'm not on that. I have the feeling that we are growing our numbers to great political power. They were, I don't want to take a name of it, there was a community X and they are 1 and they become 10. And they wanted to build the nation, give their children education. Don't you have flats which you, if you have 2 children, you give it them 2 each. If you have 10 children, you give them 1/10 each. So I'm making electric adult franchise a property. And I say 1955 ke census go, freeze it, because to be above it, they were more poor then than are today. So it's not about poor rich, it's not about religion. But I want those who contain themselves and have fewer children to not be disadvantaged politically against those who have more children.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
But I think that's something which I agree with you entirely. I think that's something which would not be politically acceptable. I don't think you could sell that idea to the country.
If you see a major one of India's top 3 magazines today, they have taken only this idea from my book and banned me.
Okay, now let me go to something else which I think you will find it very difficult to get politically acceptable. I'll just read the quote from your book. I petition that the Hindu Marriage Act be declared void and unconstitutional. Because you're arguing for a common law, aren't you? Here. So please argue why the Hindu Marriage Act should be declared void and unconstitutional.
One country, one people. I'm not on uniform civil code at all.
But
No
that's a uniform civil code. One country, one people is that, isn't it? What about Muslim personal law?
I am first saying that there is an unwritten religion and there is a written religion. Are you telling me that the British Constitution is not a constitution because it is unwritten? So first I am saying, with what authority are you challenging one set of personal laws and not the other? An unwritten personal law is not a personal law. I don't think this country will pass a religion-based act again. So rather than, and I also think social dialogue is a matter of social contract. People who go, our constitution gives too much power to elected actors who are elected for governance but have too much control on social laws. So first I say, whenever I see a toxic situation in life, I don't address the issue at hand. This is partly the reason I'm able to live despite very limited intellect. I first cause the heat to go down. Then I remove toxicity from the situation. So first I am saying that, you've given one guy, first I said, okay, you're not ready for uniform, one people, one act. First you've created one based on an unwritten religion, some act. Take it out of the way. You can't be doing this. You can't have a Parsi act, you can't have a Hindu act, you can't have 50 acts. These are social contracts. People are quite capable of dealing with them. I am just objecting to the ease with which you can just pick and pass a social edict. I'm at another point altogether. I actually see a very small role in social matters. In social matters, elected people should be franking machines. Whereas today, the matters have gone so presidential that the political people are franking machines. So I would like political tigers. I think this country would do very, very well if this country got political tigers. I don't know why there is hate for a politician. They are most humble, most practical, and despite all that you might say, it's the constitution that forgot to finance its democracy. Why is this holy and they crooks? They are very nice guys. So the whole basis of my book, whether it's bureaucracy, political structure, is that if you create dirty drains, you'll get dirty water. But essentially very good water goes into them. So I look at structure. I look at structure because I think societies are built by average people building extraordinary results, and that's why I have 9 petitions, and that's why I have a thick book.
Super, sir.
Okay, let me go to another point where I entirely agree with you. You said abolish caste or caste-based promotions. Now what about reservations? Are you for reservations? You said abolish caste or caste-based promotion. So the logical conclusion of that is that we must abolish reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. No?
No. I have a different mindset. I don't touch toxic situations. I don't touch situations I don't understand. And I feel pain. When I go as a brown-skinned man to Europe and try and build technology, if I migrate to Europe, there is no problem. Then you get accepted over 10 years as one of them. But from India, I know what is discrimination. I know what it is to work 10 times harder for 1/10 the income. 25 years later, I feel it daily. This is skip 1 meal a day. It's good for health. But I am saying blow up capacities. You need to educate 100 million children, create capacity for 150 million. We are so used to planning in shortages that we just don't realize anymore the concept of abundance. And abundance is cheaper than shortages. Because we want this daily power, iski file sign karo, iska file ye karo, iska ye karo, uska wo karo. I am looking at fairness in the structure, and the only way to do that is if you create abundant quality. Forget shortages in India. You should have a situation where people from the world want to come and learn in India. And the day you have this situation, you won't have to touch these difficult topics. We always, I'm an accountant's son. I have senior accountants in the family. I only have seen a balance sheet, and I've never seen a balance sheet without assets and liabilities. Now you want to poke the liabilities or you want to poke the assets? As an entrepreneur, I poke the assets to see which asset will reduce my liability and increase my net worth. So focus on increasing the quantum. And if everybody has more than one, then whether there is a reservation or not reservation will mean much less. We are not programmed to think in abundance.
Okay. Let me now go to another big issue, corruption. You say a lot about that in your book. I'm going to mention just the Lokpal or Ombudsman. Now you've called it a terrible institution has been established. The Lokpal you call a terrible institution that's been established. What is the alternative?
आप सबके पास insurance policy है? When you are 25, your premium is low. When you are 50, your premium is high.
75 is.
Okay, so in 1990, when I was a young factory owner, to my good luck, India liberalized. and whom you knew did not seem to matter. It still mattered, but for 5 years, those factories are shut. But how competitive the factory was, the word used to be, don't inspect quality, manufacture quality. Now you have changed nothing in the structure and added one more auditor. If I was a peaceful, permanently employed guy who came in with the nicest dreams in the world, with the cleanest heart, and I had these 7 people who could not reward me if I did well, and I did 100 good things in my life, and one guy would pick episodically one thing that I made a mistake. You know, the whole desire to go would go. This is if I'm honest. If I'm dishonest, I'll tell you, boss, this is a new act I have to fight against. The corruption premium is higher. We can't keep creating inspection and distrust. We have to clean up manufacture quality. You take Lokpal, you have CVC, you have audit, you have this, you create one more, means nothing. Go to Ordnance Factory, Calcutta. It makes a rifle that no Jawan wants. There's 19 inspection centers. You pick it up like that, no, your shoulder goes like that. 93% is therefore importing. So I always talk in nowadays everything is interrelated. Education relates science, science relates industry, industry relates services, services relate how the country is administered, how a country is administered relates to mindsets. And mindsets change because of your experience on both sides of the table. There's nothing personal about what I'm doing.
Well said. Okay. Absolutely, sir. Very good.
Now let's get to one issue which is a big issue these days, jobs. This government has failed in its promises to create more jobs. And from what I've been told just now from the exit polls, they are paying for it in the coming state elections. Tell me, you talk a lot about creating more jobs. And you mentioned somewhere, I think, that one government job could have been converted into 10 really good jobs which would have benefited the economy. Tell us a little more about your solution to the job crisis. You mentioned skills.
Everything,
Skills.
I end my chapter by imagine growth and 20 million jobs.
Yeah.
I talk in the beginning of 600 million people. Do I have a band? No. I can give you 4 or 5 viewpoints. Stop this battery of creating at different levels bureaucrats, start working with entrepreneurs. If you are going to if you are not going to see risk, you are not going to be able to manage that risk in society. The second big area that I see is go for value added. How do you go for value added? I give you one example. This is nothing to do with bureaucracy. I jump to judiciary or jump wherever. We are auctioning minerals. You know, typically, and then that mineral, you create an inefficient factory, and because you've got hold of that mineral, worse, by bidding high, that means the rich get richer, you are just creating a commodity product. And you're making a lot of money, but a lot of money relative to your neighbor, not relative to how much a producer abroad is making. Put one mine and say 5 of you put up a factory. You know, value added will start rising. Technology will get. The idea is rather than circle the resource, you have to make the resource available and let the guy who can sell it for the highest price. That's where technology comes in, value added comes in. And this is how jobs come. These DGOF factories, if they are not going to give you 93%, if you are not going to bring down that import bill, how will jobs come? if you're not going to export railway wagons and let China dominate all of Africa, and nobody is all our railway factories were created before China created the first railway. Same with BHEL, same. So if you're going to start disappearing from the world, how will jobs come? So the issue is you have to start appearing in the world. So the goal becomes how to make 0.3 into 30. It may be a 300-year journey. And then go step by step by step. Where are your assets? How are they managed? How are they optimized? And you will very quickly come that you are shackled by the constitution after 3 questions. It is so prescriptive. Indian culture is not a prescriptive culture. Brahminical cultures are prescriptive, and today they are much more open. We have reached a level where the innovation of man is at the feet of the hyper-literal. I mean, you have the liberty as a public sector manager to buy what you want. But there are 6 articles written on how you should do it. Now tell me which public sector manager is going to write a note challenging the constitution before he does what he thinks he has to do. So, you dumb it down. Trust has to be manufactured. With trust comes innovation. With that comes, so for that prescription has to go. You can't tell your daughter you can't do this. You bring her up well and say, darling, go conquer the world. That's trust.
Atul, 2 more questions before I throw it open to the audience, because I'm sure they might have got other questions to ask you. But before those 2 questions, I want to take issue with you because you make a very strange statement here, which I think Mr. Macron of Monsieur Macron of France will not be very happy with. And you say that marriage between 2 partners cannot exceed 10 years. Now, Monsieur Macron, whose wife I think is about 25 years older than him,
my marriage would dissolve. So,
so
you are quoting me wrongly.
No, your exact quote is age gap between partners cannot exceed 10 years.
There is one more word after the comma which you are not saying. Until you are the age of 30. After 30, do what you want.
But I think that's going to grab a lot of eyeballs.
So you have to make a book. It's a conversation between you and me. That's the title of my book.
Okay, let me now come to the 2 more important questions. Now you talked about education and healthcare being your 2 major concerns. Now I want to ask you, how do you move public sector from dead returns, which is what we've been getting in the economy, to live returns in health and education? I think this is a very fundamental question which I don't think any government, Congress or BJP, has really tackled.
They're not tackled because of the power that goes with controlling them. Air India is a beautiful airline. It has the best business class. It's equal to many airlines first class flight. There's nothing wrong with the airline, and everything that is wrong is intended to be wrong. And not till today, since the last 40 years. It's just, a public sector company in India is more private than a private limited company. A sole proprietor talks more to the stakeholders than a public sector company. And all our, you asked about Pandit Nehru and my problem, all our assets for which generations have gone without education and healthcare are in dead economic sector. And we are asking 3-year-old children to pass entrance exams to come into school.
Seriously.
I am knighted by the Finnish government, and that country has the best education system. You know, copy. You make an education universal and make it elitist after PhD. So you have to drive this money there. 3 public sector companies can, by the way, achieve this. So you are talking of 20 lakh crores stuck. This, what I described to you, needs less than 2 lakh crores. Now the trouble is, one government says, ek ko becho, do ko becho. I follow an accountant's principle, that if people are the owners, then there is no profit or loss. All these companies you give it to, create a people sector in the economy and give it 100 shares to every citizen of India. You can buy, sell, give. So first of all, if you have undervalued, it's between us. If you have overvalued, it is between us. And now the same managing director or general manager stands before 3 million, 10 million shareholders instead of one joint secretary. The results will be dramatic.
Agreed.
Dramatic. That man is good. Every man is good. It's the dirty pipe. मेरे को तो सब अच्छे लगते हैं. I have not met one chor chakka in my life.
Structure is what does you in, right?
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you entirely that these two areas, education, healthcare, could be financed entirely by failed public sector, pumping in so much money. Air India is a very good example. Now, your take.
In my book, I've described how the unit is killed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's boring, but anecdotally I've described it.
Yeah.
You know, the difference between my book and a general lecture is that I'm on the solution. In a talk, I'm giving you a bird's eye view of the book, but if you should choose to read the book, it's about actually how it goes and actually how it can come back, triggering a solution. Because lament, bahut ho gaya. With the result that my solutions are being called radical, but nobody is calling the problem radical.
Okay, Atul, the last question before we go to the audience. Your take, you're somebody who has started enterprises abroad, you've done things in India, your take on globalization. What's been your experience of globalization?
They came and created an interdependent story, but essentially they were looking for our markets. To their shock and horror, super bright guys like Lakshmi Mittal were born and idiots like Atul Khanna were born, but we turned up over there. And we stood there and said, hi, I'm Atul Khanna, I want to design a BMW car. I went to Helsinki and I want to design a Saab aircraft and a Saab car. And I went to Helsinki and I said, I want to design drugs for the poor. For some time it was all right. As you got bigger, they thought you do services, he'd connect us with India, and it gets bigger. Prejudice hits back. Globalization, I had a long chapter. I discussed Maruti, I discussed Nokia, Vodafone, because you are better known to them. I take you into some stories. Globalization is not a theoretical area, it's a practitioner's area. It cannot be built by those who have never done business. It needs a B2B dialogue on both sides. And there definitely is need for a globalization code. I say globalization because German courts will never entertain and openly will never entertain an Indian complaint.
Indian what? Indian
Complaint.
Complaint.
There is such a thing as a white man's code. So, if you are going to go in Finnish law, German law, by the way, unlike us who entertain only in English, they entertain only in German. So if your email exchange is also in German or Finnish, they'll tell you all, whatever is your dispute, translate it all into German, Finnish. Pehle to 50,000 euros a translation. So all this will only work if we have a globalization code. That's why you get a Brexit. Nobody has a problem with European Union, they are friends. But it has not worked academically.